Pokémon is a very formulaic series. If Jeff Keighley were to present a video game award for If It Ain't Broke, Don't Fix It, Pokémon might just be your top contender. We all know the formula by now. Create 100 plus new monsters that fit into various archetypes, have an evil organization that will turn you into a 10-year-old national hero with a weapon powerful enough to blow up a continent, throw in 8 gym leaders, an Elite Four, and a champion, and you're good to go. But what about its boss design? Well, when I throw the words Pokemon battle mechanics on screen, I'm guessing for most of you, your minds immediately go to the type chart. It's easy for us to get fixated on this thing. It's simple, you roll up to Brassius, spam Incinerate, and GG easy go next. But is it really that simple? Okay, I admit that was a bad example. I got curious about this. Game bosses are meant to do 3 things: to push you, to teach you, and to prepare you. How well do Pokemon's most notorious boss battles, the gym leaders, stack up to that? So I did what any self-respecting YouTube video essayist does. I spent days researching, made a document full of information that I definitely overcooked on, and analyzed my results. And the answer is there might just be a method to the madness, so to speak. Seems like Game Freaks put a bit of thought into what Pokemon and moves each gym leader brings to their respective table. But before we get into that gym leader analysis, we gotta get some rules established. Number 1, we are assuming the perspective of a first-time Pokemon player. It's easy to forget this, with Pokemon being among the highest grossing franchises of all time and a consistent bestseller on every platform it's ever been on, but every Pokemon game is someone's first. Yes, you and I know that if you waltz into Fortree City and your lineup's looking pretty weak to flying, then you can just skip Winona and come back later. But that's because you and I watch Pokemon videos on YouTube. We are also assuming that the player wants to learn about the various battle mechanics and not just brute force their way to the champion. Yes, you could just grind to get past each gym without learning a thing, but I maintain that this strategy sucks and does not make you a good player. If you are that player that picks a starter, levels it up to 75, and uses it to sweep every opponent, listen, I respect your hustle, play the game how you want to, but you're missing out on like the entire point of Pokemon. Also, if that is your approach, the VGC would eat you alive. Oh, and one more thing, this is not a commentary on the difficulty of the gyms. While I won't say difficulty is irrelevant, it's not the primary focus of today. It's more about figuring out what the devs were attempting to communicate by using the gym leaders as a teaching mechanism. Ergo, this is all educated guesses based on data patterns and generalized RPG gaming themes. But to the points of rules 1 through 3 might be worth remembering, going in blind means the difficulty would be dependent on whatever your lineup happens to be at the time. So with these 3 in mind, let's get into it, shall we? Traditional video game boss design, for good reason, has been so standardized it is almost comical. Introduce Mechanic X, allow a player to become comfortable using Mechanic X, throw a boss at the player that tests their mastery of Mechanic X, and maybe even teach them something new about Mechanic X while you're at it. But you can't really do that for Pokemon. It's far too open of a game for that, with all the different Pokemon stat differences and items available, just to name a few. When you saddle on up to Driftvale City, say howdy partner to Clay, and hear the battle music start, your party at this point could be any one of these permutations. Now, this number isn't the most honest thing. It includes the possibility that you could be entering the fight with a team of 6 level 55 male, timid-natured purloins with Unburden that all know Night/Fake Out, Hone Claws, and Sand Attack. But you probably aren't doing that. So if we take that number, apply a reasonable level cap, and assume you don't repeat any Pokemon, while that is a much smaller number, okay. Maybe you're not someone who puts thought into natures, you're not going to hunt for the optimal ability, and you don't care about the gender of your Mon. So if we take those out of consideration and rerun the numbers focusing only on the different Pokemon, their levels, and moveset, so you see the problem, right? The question then becomes, how do you design an educational boss fight when your game has so many variables a la Pokemon? And the answer is simple, really. You throw a boss at the player and say, okay, we gave you all of these tools, now you figure it out. It's a bit like high school math class, where Mr. Davis seems to just love pop quizzes. And you ask him, we just went over how to calculate and graph tangent curves. Why does this quiz have questions about radius formulas? And Mr. Davis comes back with, well, we need to make sure you know how to do it still for your state exams coming up soon. Fuck you, Mr. Davis, those quizzes were bullshit. Probably best to start with a broad overview of the type order. This list is non-exhaustive because I do not have enough screen space to make an exhaustive list look good, but it gets the job done. Right off the bat, I'm guessing some of you have already picked up on some patterns. You've probably noticed that Rock and Bug type tend to go early, Electric tends to go in the middle, and Ice, Psychic, and Dragon tend to go towards the end. And there's very good reasons for that. We'll get into them in just a moment. If you're a bit more eagle-eyed, you might have also noticed that Gen 7 is missing. And Alola. Look, I think what makes you different is what makes you special, and we love you for just how special you are. But I have no idea how to classify you with your island challenges and kahunas. Like, are you 4 gym leaders? 7? 11? I can't say any which way, so into the luau corner with you. I'll note that not every gym leader is going to show up in this video, and that some will show up more than once, because not everything in 9 generations of games over nearly 3 decades can be cleanly categorized. But these things happen often enough to form a pattern. Often enough that I can't exactly write them off as coincidence. Therefore, if it's not a coincidence, what's happening here? What's happening is that the strengths of each typing lend themselves to testing and teaching the player on different aspects of the game at these particular points. Testing and teaching the player on what exactly? A few things actually. Like, for example, probably the most no-duh item on the list, so we're gonna roll through it fast. These gyms exist to double check that you have an introductory knowledge of super effective and not very effective move choices. And I say introductory because, well, just take a look. This category primarily belongs to the early bug type leaders Katie, Bugsy, and Viola. But the butler trio of Solange and Cress also get in for a very different reason. Starting with the latter, the mechanics of the butler trio are simple. They will throw out a monkey that counters your starter. You throw out a monkey that you were just gifted that counters their monkey. You win the fight, pack it up, and write home about what a good job you did. There's a bit more to say about the bug types. We'll use Katie as our example because of the extra layer that is terastallizing. Any Pokemon fan knows that your Route 1 encounter list will have some form of a Pidgey-clone. The Pidgey-clone is there to deal with the upcoming forest full of bug types. While the later games don't have an intro forest, it's still a good principle to follow, so we insert our Pidgey-clones into the first wild areas. Now, Game Freak needs to make sure that you don't get very far into Scarvo without fully understanding terastallizing, so they throw this Teddy Ursa at you to show you that terastallizing changes the defense typing of a Pokemon. Because at this point, there is a very decent chance that your only experience with terastallizing has been same type. Then they throw all of these guys between you and Katie, so by the time you get to her, you have all of these options to hit bug type for super effective. Therefore, you probably caught at least one and most likely will not miss making this important connection. That's just good game design right there. Viola and Bugsy also follow this pattern, but without needing to check you on a new mechanic, the stakes are a tad lower. It's kind of funny in an ironic way. Bug type goes here because it's weak to such an early availability typing. Like I said, the gym order plays to the strengths of each type, even if that strength is actually a weakness. Are you one of those players that gets to the end of their RPG and realizes they have 300 items that they never used? Well, these guys are here to convince you not to do that. Let's look at Gen 1 Brock here. Question: when you roll up to Brock, what exactly do you have that can hit him for super effective? Well, you have these two options, who you can only have one of. And yes, you do hit for 4 times effectiveness, but is your Squirtle or Bulbasaur strong enough to 1v2 Brock's Pokemon with Bubble and Vine Whip? If you leveled them up to Brock's Ace, probably, but rule number 1. Turns out there's actually not that much space between Pallet Town and Pewter City, so if you don't know Brock's coming, that's at best a maybe. Meanwhile, all of your wild Pokemon encounters thus far have one thing in common. They are all physical attackers, who are probably not going to get very far against these defense stats. So how do you win? Your advantage over Brock is the fact that you have potions and he does not. Much like Type Chart 101, it's a simple strategy. Throw your Bulbasaur Squirtle out, they'll put in some work while Geodude and Onix throw rocks at you, and then you pop a potion or two to secure the win. The devs want to make this clear. Using items during battle is a good thing, and you should not be hoarding them. And if you chose Charmander, well, you're going to need them. In Fire Red and Leaf Green, Game Freak does toss you a bone by throwing Mankey into Route 22's encounters, but that is an optional detour route that you could have missed. Roxanne and Rourke follow this trend of having high defense mons with limited super effective options at this point. And like Brock, Roxanne has another defensive tank as her ace. Rourke instead chooses to teach you the hard way with Cranidos's absolutely insane attack for a rank 1 gym. You know, I'll even throw in Roxy from Black and White 2 for having Coughing, a respectable 95 defense with only one weakness you can currently exploit. A Psyduck with Confusion, if he's level 15. And just like with the rock types, how do you win against her? That's right, healing items. Don't be scared, they're good for you, I promise. No, don't run away. Well, we talked about Brock, so it only makes sense that we pivot over to Misty. Misty is designed to exploit a weakness that you almost inevitably have at this point in the game: Special. Like with Brock and the Rocks, most of the Pokemon currently available are physical specialists, including both attack and defense. And Misty is here to show you why that's a bad thing. When you arrive at Misty, your good special options as of this point include these Pokemon. But I'll remind you that these two are bad ideas, these three have pretty low encounter rates, and these two are locked behind the blue fight and this trainer gauntlet. And the sheer special and speed differences brought by Staryu and especially Starmie more than swing the odds back towards Misty. If you brought Pikachu and or Bulbasaur, congratulations, this fight should go rather smoothly. If you didn't, well, it's not gonna be pretty. The good news is that Staryu and Starmie don't have anything particularly impressive in regards to defense, so all of your Pokemon are going to do damage. The bad news is that Staryu and Starmie are quite fast and will exploit your lack of special defense to essentially blitzkrieg you. Nobody else in this category does it as brutally as Red, Blue, Misty, but for the most part, they are still good at their jobs. Gardenia exists as another early game special check, and if we expand the definition to include physical, we can also throw in Brawly and Maylene. Physical is not as punishing as special, given the context of Pokemon availability, but Bulk Up sure is, and Maylene is no slouch either when she brings a Guts Machoke and a Steadfast Justified Lucario. And if you're wondering how you're supposed to know about physical versus special differences by gyms 2 and 3, that's actually a good point. The games do kind of fall short on stat education. Honestly, they probably should have a lesson on physical versus special in the schools rather than just having status conditions and giving you some preschoolers to bully. The late game also uses this idea as a later check on your team comp. By the time you roll up to gyms 6 through 8, you probably have a 6 stack that you're pretty comfy with. So Game Freak throws gym pairings like Winona and Tate and Liza, Olympia and Wolfric, Sabrina, Blaine and Giovanni, and Bryson and Drayden and Iris to see how your favorite 6 Pokemon stack up to physical and special powerhouses. The second coming of a stat wall is part of the reason why Ice, Psychic, and Dragon come so late in the gym order. Dragon and Psychic are both stat powerhouses compared to the other types, and out of the top performers in stat totals are the 2 most well-rounded. If you could call Dragon well-rounded, I mean, look at this graph, it's great at like everything. I know Ice's numbers don't look great alongside Dragon and Psychic, but that's because Ice is one of the more volatile types. More often than not, the Pokemon your Ice-type leaders bring tend to swing pretty wide with what they quote-unquote specialize in, as well as what stats they tend to dump, thereby bringing the averages down. The other part of the reason that these 3 go into higher rankings is probably the relative rarity of the typings, but we don't care about that today. And it's a great move to put these stat checks towards the end of the gym leaders. The devs need to make sure you can handle these kinds of problems before your final test coming up soon. Well, shit. I guess Mr. Davis had a good point. I'm sorry. If I had a nickel for every time there was a 3rd order electric gym with ground types hidden just off screen, I'd have 3 nickels. You know how the rest goes. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, isn't every battle a DPS check? And the answer to that question is yes, but not quite how I mean it. When I use the term DPS check, I'm using it specifically in its MMORPG context. In MMORPGs, a DPS check refers to either a phase of or an entire boss fight whose mechanics are simple to deal with, and if you get caught by them, you'll be put on the bench for the rest of progression. Where this becomes a check is that the boss puts you on a continually counting down timer, either through a literal timer or through consistent small damage over time that wears the players down little by little until you can no longer out-heal it. And that is exactly what is happening with Watson. Looking at Ruby Sapphire here, Watson's team is made up of some tanky electrical agenders who can hit you for considerable damage, but if you're not packing an electric weakness, probably won't. Both Magnemite and Magneton run 2 non-damaging moves and Sonic Boom, which does a flat 20 damage. And though they have high special attack, the low power on Thundershock and Shockwave mean it's not going to one-hit you. Voltorb does have Rollout and Self-Destruct. How Watson's fight is designed to play out is those 2 requirements of a DPS check: small gradual damage and simple mechanics. Watson will alternate between Sonic Boom and low-powered electric moves and confusion/paralysis moves, in order to take tempo from you while he whittles you down. The way you naturally deal with this is using a Paralyze heal, but every time you do that, you lose a turn and get hit for more damage. And if you don't do that, you either lose a turn anyways or you lose speed, guaranteeing Watson goes first every turn. That's the timer you get put on. Add in the high defense stat and resistances of the magnets, and there's your DPS check. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, just bring a ground type. Thing is, chances are pretty good that you don't have one. The major ground types of Hoenn are available in Route 111's desert, for whom you need to beat both Flannery and Watson himself to unlock. The only ground types available before Watson are Marshtop and Geodude, a 10% encounter rate only on the first floor of Granite Cave. Thing is, he's not the most popular Pokemon. What did the Too Many Types team call him? So maybe you didn't bring him. Lieutenant Surge and Iono are a similar case of small dot damage, but have a bit more freedom with the ground types. Diglett's Cave is right next door to Vermilion City, but that assumes that after following the game's structured pathing, you don't get shinied by the gym. Iono also has Diglett located right after the shiny test and has 4 other ground types available on the way. But I promise Iono isn't just here because she's a nickel, she squeaks into the category because none of her moves break 60 power, and 2 of her Pokemon in particular. Bellibolt, whose Electromorphosis ability means you need to take it down ASAP, and who also packs Water Gun just in case you brought any of those aforeseen ground types. Then we have this Electric Terra Mismagius with Levitate, so, you know, 0 weaknesses and immune to your ground type moves. If we expand our view beyond 3rd order, we can also bring in Alessa, who comes in with a 2nd weakness in Rock type for Emolga. Alessa, being a 4th order gym leader, gets promoted to a 2nd simple mechanic in Volt Switch, so if you lead with the Rock type, you can bet Alessa is going to swap Emolga out of there with its 103 speed so that you can't take easy advantage of the weakness. And if we expand our definition outside of Electric type, we can also throw in Whitney, whose only weakness fighting is only made easily available after the fight. Yes, you could go catch a Drowsy and trade for a Machop, but rule number 1. I have to question how many first-time players did that. Another simple one, so we're gonna run through it much quicker than the last few. Best to break this down into 2 categories, status moves and stat changes. The 2 leaders most consciously designed to teach you status moves, in an admittedly trial by fire scenario, are Erica and Morty. Both famous for having sleep and paralysis moves, with Erica also packing on poison powder and Morty bringing curse. And these statuses, combined with some hefty special attack, mean that you can very easily be sent to the Pokemon Center if caught unprepared. For more friendly status moves, Sabrina and Tate and Liza both bring Light Screen and Reflect, meaning you won't be hitting them for as hard as you'd like to. And looking at the other side for stat changes, since they were already on screen and I'm lazy, let's look again to Sabrina and Tate and Liza, who both bring Calm Mind. If you haven't seen Red Blue Sabrina in action before, if she transitions a Light Screen or Reflect into Calm Mind, you should start panicking. For decreasing stats, Blaine specializes in lowering your attack with burn moves and double intimidate. Valerie and our favorite Deputy Clay are real good at riding the line, using status moves to both buff themselves and debuff you. I could talk about a fair few more gym leaders, but I won't, because this is a simple one and we're trying to pick up the pace a bit. Setup moves are a great way to snowball medium to long fights, something the game would love to put into your strategy toolbox as you get closer to the endgame bosses. Just ask the Nuzlockers, they love these strategies. God f***ing You know what? It's fine. That's why I swapped to Haunter. I'll just Destiny Bond so he murks himself. Oh, he's faster than me. Okay, sure. All right, I'll pair Song, swap Lapras out, and then just stall. You can call me a coward if you want to. I don't care. Pokemon synergy is not something you see tons of in gym leaders, mostly because of game balancing reasons, but it is an important concept that you do see on occasion. So I figured best to include it for the sake of being thorough. The most immediate example that comes to mind has to be Platinum Candace. Grouping a Piloswine with Hail, Obama Snow with Snow Warning, and an Ace Frostlass with Snow Cloak and Double Team is such a good combination that causes just so many headaches. And it's a great move to transition from Obama Snow into Frostlass. The player taking advantage of Grass Ice's wide weakness pool means Obama Snow goes down quick and Frostlass gets to maximize the amount of uptime for Snowcloak. It's just like earlier with Bug type, using the fact that Obama Snow is so bad as a good teaching tool. Wait, what do you mean that wasn't intentional? I'll also shout out Roxy for pairing Coughing Smog with Whirlipede's Venoshock. Simple but effective. I wanted to include a Ghost-type trainer for cross-Pokemon Hex synergy, but they unfortunately don't exist. I guess it would be a bit broken to do that. Baton Pass users like Volkner and Sabrina again could go here if the AI was better at reliably using it well. But for those of you who did unfortunately see a good Baton Pass, yeah, it's a problem. The next couple of categories have more questionable returns on education, but listen, I did my time researching, so now I am ethically, morally, spiritually, and sunken cost fallacy bound to talk about them. That's just how the YouTube game goes. Something the VGC is intimately familiar with because they cut their teeth on this shit. Our best example is, without a moment of doubt, Emerald Flannery, who brings Sunny Day on all 4 Vermont so that she can shine the field with Ultra Necrozma's grace and increase the power of all Fire-type moves by 50%. Met, of course, with 4 Overheats, a 130 power fire move. And then these two also run Attract, so you can sit your ass there and appreciate the gift that is the fucking sun. Look, I know I just did my F-tier joke about researching and being forced to talk about it, but gimmick fighting is a valid strategy, both at the NPC and online levels. I mean, it's not going to make you popular online, but as I said earlier, listen, I respect your hustle. Play the game how you want to. Other gimmick fighters include Norman for his slacking and facade spam, in case you tried to get cute with his truant. I didn't say it was a good gimmick. Claire for her Dragonair spam and differing type coverage moves on each one, so you won't have an idea as to what cover move she's bringing out, which can be devastating if you don't know how the Pokemon AI works. Chuck gets a mention for his Heart Gold Soul Silver Poliwrath with Hypnosis and Focus Punch. You're not slick, bud. And Whitney, this time for her Clefairy, whose gimmick is having an identity crisis, which is a bit throwy of a gimmick for an NPC, but can be powerful in the right circumstances and hands. And you know, while I'm doing a bit of a jovial tangent rant, speaking of throwing, this refers to those gym leaders whose lineups are so bad it makes you wonder how they became a leader in the first place. Like, for example, Skyla from Black and White 1. Why are you running Assurance on a Mong with 114 speed? You have no way to capitalize on it. And you're only using physical moves on a Mong with 57 attack and 77 special attack. It's not like you don't have options for special attack. I've seen Mubat's Learn set, I know they're there. And why are you using Unpheasant, a historically bad Pokemon, for their physical attack specialty, but whose powerful moves are only special attack? Blaine, for a scientist, you're looking kind of stupid here for running Ember and Fire Spin at Gym 7, and also bringing Growlithe and Ponyta, whose stats are just so low for this point in the game. This doesn't tell me you're a brilliant scientist and battle expert, it tells me you own a Rapidash ranch on the side. Bugsy, you picked Kakuna and Metapod when there were multiple much better options right outside of town. Like, just walk 3 blocks, my guy, please. You know, gym leaders like that. I'm also tempted to put Lenora here for being a normal type gym leader right next to Pinwheel Forest where these guys exist. But she is basically a teacher, certainly an educator, so I'll give her a pass. I guess my soft spot for teachers has grown a bit today. Well, what can I say? I'm sorry. At the end of it all, there is one more test the game has before the Elite Four and Champion. One last check on your knowledge before your final exam. This one's for you, Mr. Davis. Earlier gyms like Brock, Bugsy, Valerie, etc. usually have just one thing going on, maybe two at most. Here though, that number is free to get cranked up a bit. Quick reminder of Rule 3. We're not looking at difficulty here. When I say balanced, what I mean is there are multiple ideas being thrown at you that you have to adapt to on the fly. My preferred example of this is Wallace from Ruby and Sapphire. He leads with Love Disc, the lowest stat-wise of the party, but is a speedy mofo whose goal is to immediately put you on the back foot with either confusion or attraction, thereby putting the battle tempo in Wallace's favor. Love Disc will be followed by a team full of HP tanks who all play to their different physical and special strengths. Seaking specializes in attack and therefore is able to capitalize well on Fury Attack. He also packs Horn Drill for one-hit KOs and Rain Dance, both to use his Swift Swim ability and set up for later party members. Wishcash also has Rain Dance and goes all in on general tankiness with his 110 HP stat Amnesia for special defense, and as the kicker only has one weakness. Meanwhile, his Rain Danced Water Pulse and Stab boosted Earthquake will hit you like an earthquake, I guess. Celio brings Encore that can put you in a very unfavorable situation if you're not careful, and Roar Beam to chip away at both your HP and attack stat. And Wallace's Ace Milotic comes with Twister to get you to flinch, Ice Beam to utilize her great special attack and recover. Just in case that good HP and defense, great special defense, and Marvel Scale are not enough. Yes, Wallace is a water-type leader, which means grass and electric are still going to be great and can absolutely carry you. But that's really more of a fault on him for being a gym leader, and Hoenn for wanting a monotype champion for some reason. If you were to take these typings and just shift them around a bit, you could run this lineup in online battles and see some success. I assume. I don't do online Pokemon battling, so maybe the VGC is laughing at me right now. Other final gyms that I'd like to shout out for strategic variety/balance include Claire, Marlin, Platinum, Volkner, and, well, Juan by default, I guess. The level, effectiveness, and, yes, difficulties of their balance/variety varies between them, but the tactical diversity is noticeable when you look at all their lineups. Some hit it better than others, but it is noticeable nonetheless. And yes, Johto Blue would go here as our ultimate example, but we're not looking at post-game here. And that's most of how Pokemon's gym leaders are pseudo-formulaically designed to teach you to be a better trainer. I put pseudo here because not every generation has all of these categories. In my opinion, Kanto, Hoenn, and Sinnoh do the best job at utilizing their gym leaders in an instructive fashion. It would be unfair of me to try to hold Game Freak to using this pseudo-formula in every game. As the series changes over time and introduces new mechanics such as Mega Evolution and open worlds, they have other things on their plate to worry about designing well. So I'm not going to get on their case too badly here. But I am going to get on their case for one thing. It feels like the design of the gym leaders has gone down a bit in quality. Not from a personality or aesthetic perspective, I mean, who are we kidding here? Larry's just peak character design. But from the perspective of a varied move pool. You guys can tell me in the comments if I'm wrong or looking too deeply, but let me at least make a case first. You know what? Alola, get in here. Here's a breakdown of the split between physical special status moves and overall strategy focus per Pokemon, per gym, per generation. I averaged them across the different versions of each region, making sure to consider both the quantity of moves themselves and Pokemon whose moves and stats specialize them towards a certain battle ideal. And when I look at this here trend, it doesn't look that good. I find moves like Leer, Charm, Confuse Ray, and Dragon Dance, with their either 100 near 100 or perfect accuracies, to be important to include. Because when these get thrown out, they just happen. If something like String Shot, for example, comes out, you just have to deal with the repercussions of not going first on a Pokemon you relied on speed for. That's good learning for a first-time player. Yes, most of the time the damaging moves being chosen for gym battles have a secondary RNG effect to either apply a status condition or alter stats. But outside of unique cases, these moves are either very low power or the RNG chance caps out usually around 30% likelihood, meaning it's common to go through fights not having to deal with these mechanics at all. It does make the game more accessible difficulty-wise, but in my opinion, the boss fight element less interesting and, for what it's worth, less educational. I point out difficulty accessibility because of Let's Go, which you'll notice have a sharp difference compared to the other Kanto games. We all know the Let's Go games were designed specifically with Pokemon Go beginners in mind, but to quote myself here, "But every Pokemon game is someone's first." Which means Crystal, Emerald, Platinum, and every other game were also designed with first-time players in mind, and look at those games. There is a cost for changing philosophy like this. It really cuts down on showing you how effective these strategies can be, therefore not making you as good of a Pokemon trainer as you could be. Alright, Alola, thank you for your help. Sorry it was to make you a bad example, but what can you do? Back into the luau corner with you. I want this discussion to have a happier ending. I really appreciate having variance in the gym leaders and boss fights in general, so I'll end with this. Scarlet and Violet are the clear worst offenders. The ratio is just so abysmal on this front. And in context, it's pretty hard to call them an outlier. But we all know just how rushed those games were. On the other side of the recent games, Sword and Shield did a pretty decent job with this, a game that was able to take its time. So I remain hopeful that if Game Freak is given proper time for Gen 10, they could see a comeback on this front. Suppose we'll have to see how well this ages next year. But you know what does have a happier ending? This video. There's something I feel like I should probably address before we wrap, and that is, what the f? If you're wondering why I'm pointing this out, that was only my first video, and my math here tells me this is my second video. And while I hate to point this out again, you guys kinda forced my hand here. I won't be including this in my outros going forward. Genuinely, thank you so much for the support from my Persona video. It is kinda mind-blowing, truly humbling, and one hell of a motivator to keep going. When you upload your first video, traditionally it's not supposed to do very well. Like the algorithm was supposed to kill it with 20 views. This wasn't part of the plan. You guys aren't supposed to be here right now. But since you are, I'll pull back the editing curtain a tad. There is a reason I opened my outro from the last video with this scene in particular. It was a bit of a meta joke edit for myself, one that nobody but me was ever meant to appreciate. However, the sheer volume of support I received makes this scene relevant again, so I'll run it back, this time spelling it out plainly. The scene is of Dr. Maruki trying to convince Joker Persona to give him a chance and come back in the future, so if I could quote him real quick, "Thank you for coming. I'll try to make sure it's worth the trouble."